Hello and welcome to the first of four special videos that you're going to be watching in connection with this class, the book of Hebrews. This session that will be about 30 minutes, each of these special videos will last about 30 minutes as opposed to an hour concerning the text of Hebrews. This video is concerning the message of Hebrews. Now recall, all of the videos that you're watching this 6 weeks, each one of them, you will have to write a 500-word summary and turn it in on the Blackboard class class site. So make sure that you do that following the watching of this video. This is concerning the message of the book of Hebrews. You may have already watched one or more of the videos concerning the text of Hebrews. If that is the case, then that's good because you've already got in mind what Hebrews is about. And I'm sure by now you've also written the outline of Hebrews and or you actually work on it, so that would be good as well to get your mind focused on what the epistle is about. The design of the epistle to the Hebrews is definite and it's certain, as opposed to the authorship of Hebrews, which is not certain, is not definite, because the book simply does not mention who wrote it. If you've already watched the PowerPoint presentation concerning authorship of Hebrews, you're already familiar with the various options that have been posed as far as the authorship of the epistle. I have my own opinion as to who wrote Hebrews, but it's just that, an opinion, because the Bible does not definitively say. I think there are indications as to who wrote it, but we can't say for certain. But the message of Hebrews, the design of the book, is definite. It is certain. It sets before the Jew, the Israelite, the claims of Christianity. And I might add, it sets before the child of God who wants to go back into Judaism the claims of Christianity. It was difficult for a faithful Jew in the first century to realize that he should give up the Jewish system. Think about somebody like the Apostle Paul, who had been reared in Judaism. He was being groomed by the higher-ups in the Sanhedrin to be the person in Judaism. And so it would be difficult for that person to realize that all of this that he has grown up in and been used to is going to be done away with, or has been done away with. It was easy for him, and I might add, easy for certain members of the church in the first century, to hold to the outward Jewish institutions and also the appointments, and to regard them as the substance and not regard them as the shadow. Do you get what I'm saying here? For someone who had grown up in that system, it would be very difficult for him or her to see that this is not all there is. That there's something better than this. There's something more than this. There was a danger, therefore, into lapsing into unbelief as a result. There was a danger in forsaking Christ if this person was a child of God through obedience to the gospel, and yet that person wants to go back into Judaism, into that system again, then you're returning into a sort of Mosaism, Mosaic law, Mosaic trappings, Levitical priesthood, and the like. You're wanting to revert back into that old way in which you had grown up. The great design of the book of Hebrews is to bring the Jew and to the Christian who had grown up in Judaism to the full realization of the relationship, both positive and negative, between Judaism and Christianity. It was also to make clear that Christ has fulfilled the temporary and provisional institutions of Judaism. And so he has taken away the entire system. That's what the Hebrews writer is trying to get across. He begins this epistle by establishing the superiority of Christ above the angels. He makes it very clear that Christ is above the angels. He makes it very clear that Christ is great and superior high priest. He affirms it by looking at what the Old Testament says concerning the promise that God made. The Lord has sworn and will not repent. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. He goes on to describe the comparison and the contrast between the Levitical high priest and the high priest after Melchizedek's order. And he goes on to talk about the particulars in that. He talks about the fact that Christ is superior to the Levitical high priest in that he descends from a priest that is of an eternal oath, perpetual. It never ends. So his priesthood is ongoing. He also is superior to the high priest in that in the Levitical priest, in that he does not make offering for himself and the people, because he was made like unto his brethren in the flesh. He suffered many things, and that way he can be our merciful and faithful high priest, and he's able to help us when we are tempted. He goes on to talk about the fact that Christ offered himself once for all. In that way, he is superior to the high priests. Then he talks about Melchizedek himself. He talks about the description about Melchizedek as we find him in the Old Testament. He also had emphasized about those who were apostatizing, those who were falling away in Hebrews 6, and the possibility of us doing that. All of this is building up toward his central point from about chapters 8 through 10. 8, 9, and 10, in the very heart of the book, is the core message of Hebrews. The core message of Hebrews is that there is a change. There's a change in the priesthood. There's a change in the law. There's a change in the system. So you're not going underneath the Mosaic system with its inferior priesthood and inferior promises, but you are in the priesthood of Christ after the order of Melchizedek with its superior sacrifice, its superior promises, all of this being better than the type. Types and antitypes factor into this. Types and shadows, some have called it. He talks about the covenant that was in place in the old law. And then the difference in that and the new covenant, which God had promised to make. He cites Jeremiah 31 through 34, there in Hebrews chapter 8, and applies it to the change from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant, the Old Testament to the New Testament. His whole point is the old law has been taken out of the way. It's been nailed to the cross, as the Apostle Paul would put it in Colossians 2. Here he emphasizes that it's been taken out of the way. And in Hebrews 9, he goes on to talk about the covenant, the trappings of the covenant, and the furniture of the tabernacle, and the sacrifices that were made, and the meats and the drinks and the washings and the ordinances and all of this. And then Christ comes, and it's a greater, more perfect tabernacle. It's a greater sacrifice. And he contrasts the sacrifice of bulls and goats with the sacrifice of Christ's own blood. And the dedication of the temple, of the tabernacle, the dedication of the testament, the Old Testament by Moses when he sprinkled blood upon the book and upon all the people. And Christ entering in once with his own blood. He purges the whole thing. In the end of chapter 9, he's talking about Christ was once offered. It's not a perpetual sacrifice. I mean, an annual sacrifice, as was the case in the old law, where you had to go in every year on the Day of Atonement to make a sacrifice for the people, and it would be rolled forward as we would say, and it was looking for the perfect sacrifice. It's not that way anymore. The sacrifice has been made. Jesus Christ offered himself once for all sacrifice upon the cross, and it takes away the sins of all the people, past, present, future. And we look for him the second time to come. He was once offered to bear the sins of many, and to those who look to him, he will appear the second time without sin unto salvation. Looking forward then to that final day of judgment. So he goes on in chapter 10 and talks about again, the contrast between the old covenant and the new covenant, and the fact that the blood of goats and calves, the blood of bulls and goats could not take away sin. And the superiority of the blood of Christ, the precious blood of Christ, in fact. He talks about the new and living way that Christ has made open into the holiest, the holy place. He is presently our high priest. We can draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith because of all of this being done. Because the covenant has been taken away, the old covenant, the new covenant's been instituted, the death of the testator has made it possible for that new covenant to be instituted. It is superior in every way possible. He exhorts them, of course, toward the end of chapter 10 to be faithful and to not forsake the assembling together as some were already doing. He is encouraging them, admonishing them not to become unfaithful. And then you come to chapter 11, that great chapter of faith, mentioning all of the worthies of the Old Testament, the great hall of fame of faith, both men and women listed, all these fantastic people, all these great names of men and women who live lives of faithfulness to God, the men that we're so familiar with, Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, all of these. Moses, he spends a lot of time about Moses. Joseph, of course, prior to Moses, spends a lot of time though on Moses about his faith, talking about, of course, the Israelites by faith overcoming the walls of Jericho, Rahab, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophets. Many of them without name, many of them named in particular. All of these people walked in faith. And as we're going to be looking at in our study of Hebrews 11, once you get to that point, we're going to be talking about the kind of faith they had. Is it that they just believed and that was all? Not at all. We're going to see what kind of faith they had. And it's an amazing depiction here in this great hall of fame of faith in chapter 11. Then Hebrews 12 really is bringing it all home to the reader, both in the first century, to whom the writer is penning this epistle, and to us today, where he's emphasizing the fact that the Christian life is a marathon. It is not a sprint. It's something that we endure. It's something that we persist in, something that we go through. We work through. That is not to say we work to earn salvation, but we persist through the difficulties, through the hardships, through the tough times, to come out the other side better than we were when we entered. So he's encouraging them in chapter 12 to be faithful and to not slip, to be lifted up and not to be brought down. Make sure that you conduct yourself among all people in a way that is fitting, that is proper as a child of God. Uh, Make sure that you're not like Esau, who forfeited his birthright for just a morsel of meat, or a mess of meat, a mess of pottage, that is. Uh, we need to be like those faithful people that he had described in chapter 11. And he again emphasizes how that the church is made up of select people, those who obey the gospel. Those who are brothers and sisters are a select group indeed. And we have a Savior who is not ashamed or embarrassed to call us brothers and sisters. We have a merciful God who doesn't look to zap us when we stray away from the path. He doesn't look to see if we've made a mistake. He is merciful, and he's faithful, and he's loving. And he wants us to do right. He wants us to go to heaven. He wants us to be with him in complete and full fellowship. So he comes to chapter 13, and he's drawing all this to a close by having some various words of exhortation for them. Talks about certain individuals that were with him, of course. Talks about the people who had the rule over them and those who are now ruling over them. And when we get to that point in our text, we'll talk about who that's referring to. He talks about marriage in Hebrews 13:4. What he briefly says about marriage in Hebrews 13:4 is so important, especially the message to those who are not married today. It's so needed, and we need to give heed to it. Make sure we listen to what he says concerning that, even though it's not just a brief message. It's something which is so needed today. Make sure that your life is as it ought to be, and not following those who are in the world, but following Christ. He emphasizes Christ throughout. He emphasizes Christ throughout this book. And the message of Hebrews is that Jesus is superior. Jesus is superior to all people, all things, all places. And we need to make sure that we're aware of that and live our lives accordingly. Because if we don't, then we're going to slip. And in the day that we live in, where so many people say that you can't judge, and you can't say that one way is superior to another, and you can't say that one religious leader is superior to another. The message of Hebrews is so important, and it is as controversial today as it was when it was first written in the first century. You think about getting in a group of people in public and declaring that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and that there's no other way but his way that's legitimate, and see what kind of flack you'll receive. See what will happen. Make that statement in public and see what kind of opposition you'll have. It is my firm conviction that if Jesus were to set foot on this earth as he did in the first century, and I believe he will not, he won't set foot on this earth. He will come again, yes, but it won't be to set foot on this earth. It'll be to destroy the earth and the universe, and then judge all people who've ever lived. But if he were to set foot on this earth, he would be just as much opposed today as he was in the first century. Because his message would be just as controversial, if not more so today. You try to tell somebody that Christianity is the only way to go to heaven, and you'll be amazed at the kind of reaction you'll receive. You're not supposed to say that. We live in a pluralistic society. Pluralistic meaning that all ways are legitimate. That the way of Buddha is legitimate. That the way of Confucius is legitimate. That the way of Krishna is legitimate. The way of Muhammad is legitimate. All of these religions, they say, are ways of becoming enlightened. And to say that Christianity is superior to all the rest is bigoted, we are told. Well, if that's the case, then Christ was bigoted. We know he wasn't. If Christ existed, and he did, if Christ existed, then what do you do with him? What do you do with him? The question that Pilate asked in the long ago still is legitimate. What will you that I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? What will I do? What will you do? That's the stumbling block, isn't it? So many. How do you view Christ? Was he a good man? Well, if he existed, and there's a lot of people, and it's growing, a lot of people that believe that Jesus did not exist. But given that he existed, and there's good evidence to show that he did, then was he a good man? Even those who do not believe that Jesus is the Son of God, if they believe that Christ existed, they would have to agree that he was a good man. That is to say, he wasn't guilty of any crimes. He was never charged with anything that stuck. It was a kangaroo court in which he was brought before. Trumped up charges. They couldn't even agree among themselves what charges to bring. So he was a good man, morally. But yet, he made some claims about himself. Were those claims true? If he was correct, then he's more than just a man. If he is not correct, then he was not a good man because he was deceiving people. A good man doesn't deliberately deceive people. And if Jesus was not who he said he was, then he was a deceiver, yet he wasn't. Was he insane? Was he out of his mind? No. If we are to trust the gospel accounts, which we can, if we are to trust what the gospel accounts say concerning Jesus, he was engaged in much rational conversation with his enemies. A back and forth, questions and answers. Jesus answered questions and asked questions. He spoke eloquently when he preached. This was not the hallmark of a man who had lost his mind. He was quite sane. So if he's not insane, and if he's not a deceiver, if he's a good man and he's sane, then what does that leave? That leaves his claims, does it not? He claimed to be the Son of God. He claimed upon himself the title Son of Man. Was he correct? Well, if he was, then we have an obligation to him, don't we? We have an obligation to obey him. Because if he is from God, and he proved that he is from God in the miracles and signs which he performed in the presence of many, raising a body from the tomb that had been dead for 3 days and was beginning to stink, raising him from the dead, himself being raised from the dead the 3rd day after he was crucified. Is that a man that is a mere man, or is that someone who is more than just a man? I think Jesus has proven beyond any reasonable doubt that he is who he claimed to be. So what the Hebrews writer is doing in his epistle is going off of the assumption that Christ exists, that Christ was a good man, that Christ was sane, that Christ was who he said he was, the Son of Man and the Son of God. And he's plumbing the depths of the implications of that. Why is this man more than just a man? How is it declared? Well, he starts off right at the very top in Hebrews 1, talking about the backstory, if you want to put it that way, the backstory of Christ. And the distinction that's made between him and the angelic host and the divine beings. And everything builds off of that. Everything progresses from that point all the way through all 13 chapters of the book. Establishing Christ's superiority, establishing the superiority of Christianity to that of Judaism, and the importance of us today, as well as them in the first century, living the kind of life that reflects Christ and reflects God's character and his teaching before all people. That, my friends, is what we need to take away from this book. And if we do that, then we will have done ourselves a great service. And we can then turn right around and show it to others. That's what we must be about the business of doing. Make sure that I'm in a right relationship with my God through Christ, through obedience to the gospel. Hebrews 5, 8, and 9, though he were a son, yet learned the obedience by the things which he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation to all them that obey him. When we do that, we're saved from our sins. We're Christians, nothing more, nothing less. And then as Christians, as followers of Christ, we go forth and we shine and reflect the image of Christ to a lost world. Well, that's the message of Hebrews. And I hope this helps you as you go through this epistle, as you work through the assignments, as you go through the videos. Keep all this in mind. We're going to be emphasizing this along the way if we already haven't. If you've already watched some of the videos, you're familiar with some of these things we've talked about. So make sure that you turn in your 500-word review of this video and get it in the appropriate place on Blackboard. And then got 3 more videos, special videos to go. Besides this one, they're about 30 minutes each, and you'll have it all done. And then you'll have all the videos of the text watched, Hebrews chapter 1 through chapter 13. Have all those reviews turned in, and boy, you're going to be ahead of the game. You're doing great. I'm sure that you'll get all of your assignments turned in, and you'll make a very good grade for this class. I have a very big amount of faith in you. You can do it. Get all this work done by the end of the 6 weeks, and you'll be in really, really good shape. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next video.